My name is Scott Gampfer. I'm Director of History Collections and Preservation at Cincinnati Museum Center. I'm 55 years old. Today is July 16th, 2010, and the location is Cincinnati Museum Center, Cincinnati, Ohio. And relationship to partner, I'm a friend and colleague of Mr. Mallory's for many years.
My name is William L. Mallory, Sr. I will be 79 on October 4th of this year. And I'm here at the Cincinnati Museum Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. And relationship to the partner, we have collaborated on gathering collections of African American citizens so that we have a great collection of history related to the African American community in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Mr. Mallory, what I want to talk to you about today is you've had a very long involvement with Cincinnati Union Terminal and, of course, Cincinnati Museum Center, going back to your days living and growing up in the West End. And I want to talk to you today about several phases or aspects of that involvement. But the thing I'm interested in starting with is I know your involvement with Union Terminal began when you lived in the West End, and it was a very important thing in the community here. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what was your earliest involvement with Cincinnati Museum Center, or rather with Union Terminal, the facility Union Terminal, and tell us a little bit about what impact that had on your early life.
Well, my first involvement with the Cincinnati Union Terminal, as it was called then, which eventually became the Cincinnati Museum Center, started as early as the 1940s. I had moved to the West End of Cincinnati after the Great Flood of 1937, and the Union Terminal was surrounded by, it was a low-income neighborhood, predominantly African American, and this facility served as sort of a very interesting recreation center, educational center, and so forth, because most of the people who lived near the Union Terminal came here to socialize. Number one, I think there's some people who came to sit on the benches in the park, and courtships began here, which led to marriages later. We young fellows used to sit underneath the flagpole and tell stories and have fun talking and conversing. I remember that the citizens used to throw coins into the fountain, and we thought that was great because we rolled up our pants and just went in and got those coins because we certainly were in need of money in those days. Another thing is this. It was the housing that I lived in near it, not far from Union Terminal, which is about 10 minutes away, was housing that was low-income housing. It was what would be described as dilapidated housing in many cases. But during the summer, particularly as you look at what's happening here weather-wise, and these what we call cold water flats, but they certainly weren't cold in the summertime. It was so hot. I remember my mother raising up the window and throwing water down on the concrete on the next level. But we were allowed to come here to Union Terminal, bring our blankets, and sleep on the grass and keep cool, and that was a great thing that they trusted us to do that, and as a result, we got some relief from the heat. But it was also here where it was an economic kind of opportunity here also. Crosley Field was not far from this facility, and the people would come here and use the parking here at Union Terminal. And we young men would tell the people who parked their cars that we would be happy to watch their cars until they returned from the ball game. And when they did, they usually gave us 10 or 15 cents and we earned money that way. I dropped out of school once, and I got a job working at the Gateway Restaurant, which is now one of your reception areas. And I worked as a busboy, and I earned some money, and I was very happy to do so. I think what I remember is a movie house was here. There was a game room here. People loved to take photos, go in and take those 3 photos for 10 cents and so forth and so on. And I remember during the World War II, rather, all the soldiers and sailors and all of those coming through, and all the people who got drafted going into World War II. I also remember that I took my first train trip from this facility at age 12, and my father wanted me to meet my relatives who lived in Louisville, Kentucky, my uncle Ernest Mallory, and he put a red ribbon around my arm and gave me my ticket and gave me enough money, he said, to meet my uncle, because there were 2 railroad stations in Louisville, Kentucky in 1943, and one was L&N, one was B&O, and he didn't know which one I was going to arrive, where I would arrive, so he gave me enough cab fare to go to 1213 West Hill Street, right down the street from the old Browns and Williamson Tobacco Company, and so that was a very interesting summer because we could not go to recreation centers. Polio was raging in the country at that time.
Tell me a little bit. The train trip reminds me to ask you. Tell me a little bit about the so-called Jim Crow seating and the importance of Union Terminal for trains going south.
Yes.
And also those coming north in terms of African Americans' experience.
Well, if you were coming from the north and came into Cincinnati, segregation began when you got to Cincinnati. You got in segregated cars. The interesting thing that I want to talk about those days when black people took trips on trains, since we couldn't go in Pullman cars. What we did, we were always equipped with a shoebox with chicken and maybe an apple and an orange, because we couldn't go into the dining room and eat. So this was the beginning of real segregation for a lot of African Americans who came from the north going to the south.
You mentioned having worked, I think, as a busboy at the Gateway Cafe here in the train station, and that's another issue I want to talk about. How important to African Americans in the West End was Union Terminal as an employer or a source of employment?
Well, it was a great thing because the employment of Pullman porters and red caps was very important, because those men, in a sense, represented the black middle class. They sent they had hard work to do. They didn't make great wages, but what they did was they sent their children to college on the meager earnings that they were getting. And so, if you remember the story of A. Philip Randolph and the Brotherhood of Pullman Porters, I read the story, and they were looked up to in this community very highly, and they were the role models.
I want to skip ahead a little bit and talk about your involvement with the conversion of Union Terminal, which was, of course, passenger train service ended here in 1972, and there was an interesting history there where there was some attempt to find an adaptive reuse of the building. It was a shopping center for a while, and
Yes.
so on, as you know. But I want to skip ahead to this period where the idea came about to convert Union Terminal into a museum complex, and I believe originally the name that we used for that project was Heritage Center, I think was the first name.
Yes.
And you, of course, were in the state legislature at the time, and I really don't know the story, so I'm interested in who approached you initially about the project, and how did you become involved in helping that to happen politically and in terms of funding? I know you had a very important role to play in that.
Well, I was visited by Judge Mark Painter and Sue Painter. I think Sue Painter was an employee here at that time.
Yes.
And they came to Columbus and told me what they wanted to accomplish, which was to convert this into the Heritage Center, as you called it, which eventually was the first step toward the Museum Center being created. And then I recall that they told me that they wanted me to meet with some people, a few people, to talk about funding and so forth and so on. So I met with some men at 4th and Walnut on the 10th floor of the First National Bank building. And since I thought there were only going to be a few people there, I walked in the door, there were 10 white males sitting around the table. So I looked at this and I said, who in the hell's running the city here while you guys are sitting around the table? And then we discussed what I expected to happen if the Museum Center was created. I was concerned that the African American community benefit from this facility, and I told them the things that I was concerned about. I said I wanted African Americans in the administration. I said I wanted also in the gift shop, the Arts Consortium could put their goods in and sell it to help finance that. I told them that, and I wanted it constructed by an African-American company. And also I said I want an entrepreneur. And they said, what do you mean entrepreneur? I said, well, you said there's going to be 1 million people coming through here. So I figure if that happens, we need somebody to shine shoes like I used to do. You can make a lot of money if 1 million people coming through here. So I got them to agree to that. But later on, when I checked back with them, they were suffering from what I call selective amnesia. They didn't remember any of these agreements they made with me. So I told them that until they did that, they couldn't get the money from the state. And then they sent me, they verbally agreed to do it, as I said. But I told them I had to put it in writing. It's on deposit here now, the agreement that we originally had. So it acted as an economic opportunity to the African American community in Cincinnati.
Ultimately, what was the degree of state support that came to the project?
Well, we secured $8 million. That was a sum that meant a lot back in those days, and it was the pivotal act that started the ball rolling to getting other kinds of funding and private support and so forth. And
when the levy was put before voters of Hamilton County, and I believe that was in 1986,
yes,
the bond levy, to raise the money to convert the actual physical facility from a train station and shopping center into a museum center. How involved were you in that political process of actually getting that levy passed?
Well, in fact, my whole family was involved in supporting it politically, and I got to say that the method by which the Museum Center put on the campaign from a public relations standpoint was utterly outstanding and captivated the imagination of the people of Cincinnati. Now, that wasn't hard to do because almost every Cincinnatian has some recollection of the Union Terminal, and so it's embedded. And remember, it was it was considered one of the wonders of the world at the time it was built.
Yeah, it still is.
Still is.
Still is. Well, the levy did pass, although it was close. It did pass, and that, of course, created the funding stream to convert the building and to get the ball rolling. And, of course, the original partner organizations were the Museum of Natural History and Science and the Cincinnati Historical Society. And we're now in our 20th anniversary year. It was 1990 that we moved into the building and had that grand opening. Were you present actually at the ribbon cutting and grand opening of the building?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, I imagine you were. And what did that feel like that day when you saw this idea that was pitched to you actually come to fruition?
Well, I got to be honest with you. Actually, I was not on the program, and that sort of infuriated me, and I left the facility. And M.J. Klein, who was a lobbyist for the University of Cincinnati, asked me to come back, which I did, and then I addressed the group at that point. So there was a little bit of a mix-up as to I don't know how it got left off the program, but it was rectified.
Yeah, oh, great. And now, tell me a little bit about your family's involvement in politics. We touched, of course, on your having been in the state legislature, but we didn't explain what that meant, and your family's involvement with this city and with the city and state politics going back as far as it does. Tell us a little bit about that history.
Well, it began, I think, with my interests in government and social studies. I had some great social studies teachers and government teachers, particularly at Bloom School, where I ran for my first office of any kind, Secretary of Student Government. And I went to my first political meeting when I was 12 years old. I went to the Lincoln Douglas Republican Club, which met at 6th and Mound, and I was taken there by my family physician, Dr. R.P. McLean, who was the second black city councilman in the history of Cincinnati. My mother had asthma, and whenever he came to see her, I would get in his car and go to his office and get her medicine, and I would walk back and take it to her, and so she could have it to deal with her illness. But on the way, Dr. McLean and I would discuss politics. And I was a New Deal Democrat, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I could name every member of the cabinet of FDR. And he took me to this political meeting of the Lincoln Douglas Republican Club at 6th and Mound Street. I was there about 10 or 15 minutes. And they decided that I should not be there because there was all these important discussions going on that my tender ears shouldn't hear, confidential political maneuvering and all that sort of thing. And they attempted to put me out of the meeting. And Dr. McLean said, well, I don't know why we should put him out of the meeting because 10 minutes after we leave here, one of you will give the whole story to one of the three newspapers, which was then the Cincinnati Times-Star, the Cincinnati Post, and the Cincinnati Enquirer. He said he won't be the one to do that, so just let him stay. And so that's how I got my first political education as a 12-year-old. And then I got involved in local politics in the 18th Ward in the West End. And in 1966, when One Man, One Vote came into being, I ran for office, and my political party, which I thought supported me, did not support me. So I had a primary battle. I beat him. I told him I was going to beat him 2-1, and I beat him 2-1. I got elected in 1966. And I served for 28 years. I became the first African-American to be elected majority floor leader in the history of Ohio, the longest serving, and still the longest serving, and the longest serving representative from Hamilton County. Then I was followed by my son, Mark Mallory, who was the mayor of the city of Cincinnati, and he was followed by Dale Mallory, who is now a state representative from Ohio and Cincinnati. And also I filed a lawsuit which broke up the election of judges by at large, and it created districts. And as a result, my son, William Mallory Jr., became a municipal court judge, and my son, Joe Mallory, became vice mayor out in Forest Park. And let's see what I leave out. Dwayne Mallory, of course, has been elected on his own. And I think I've named all of those who were elected. So I never talk about having a political dynasty because I'm a little superstitious in that area. I don't like to talk about that. But they were all dedicated to what I was dedicated. I went into the legislature because I saw the conditions when I was growing up in the 30s and the 40s, the things that I wanted to change in this state to make it a better place for citizens, better housing, health care, economic opportunity, almost you can a litany of things that would improve the lives of people. That's what I was interested in, and I was able to pass a lot of good legislation to help a lot of people.
I want to kind of go back to something you touched on in the beginning, and that is this idea of the West End as it was around Union Terminal when it was built, being this vibrant community, largely African American, with its own institutions and so on. That community, of course, was greatly affected by two things: the construction of I-75 and the clearing of that land for that construction, and then later the Queensgate construction, which, of course, eventually removed most of the residential housing around Union Terminal. And that seems like a lot of that happened starting in the late 50s and into the 60s, even into the time when you first got into elected office. Tell me a little bit about what that meant to people who had lived or were living in West End at the time, and maybe the people who had lived there, this whole community virtually disappearing.
Well, that was done as a result of the master plan of 1948. It was the Laurel Richmond project, the Kenyon Bar project, and to me is one of the most devastating things that I've ever experienced. People can look at a neighborhood and they say poor people live there. But what they don't understand is what those people who live in that community have in terms of their relationships. Number one, they have their own political organization. They have their own support systems. And the social relationships. I remember it was a great thing in the community to play whist. I know they call it bid whist today, but this was a highly competitive game that they played, and all the things they did to survive collectively was very important. And institutions played a great part. The Gett Street Recreation Center, Lincoln Community Center, Finley Street Neighborhood House, and the institutions that were destroyed by urban renewal was very detrimental, because that saved guys like me from going to places like these, the following institutions, which were reformatories. It kept me from going to Longview. It kept me from going to Lancaster, and it kept me from going to Mansfield Reformatory, because we had dedicated people in those centers who became almost like our parents. And so these people were scattered all over Cincinnati. And I think it played a great part, in the rebellion in 1967, because I think there was still seething anger because people did not know where they were going to go. They had no idea, and you never have really recaptured that, because you could be living 4 blocks away from your best friend, but you didn't know that because, you lived over here. But here, we could go all over the West End, in any part. We knew each other. We had our own recreation. We had entertainment. The Cotton Club was very, very prominent. And
churches and
businesses and all of that, ownership, and all of that was very important. So all of that was destroyed. I don't think we have ever reached that level again. We're still trying to get black businesses.
Sure. I want to talk just a little bit about Union Terminal today as Cincinnati Museum Center. Again, Cincinnati Museum Center is now in its 20th year, and I'm sure there were a lot of people in the beginning who weren't sure if it was going to make it. It was really a gamble, but it has made it, and it's prospered and become a really, I believe, a vital part of the community here. But I'd like you to talk about that a little bit. What do you think the real value of Cincinnati Museum Center is today to the community? And I know you still have a great commitment to this organization. And tell us a little bit about today and what this organization means to Cincinnati and Hamilton County and even a broader region than that.
I think I would describe this as a beacon of light. And I think I would describe it as a facility which is very progressive, which has as its goal to expose people culturally, educationally, and to do things that have not been done before. And it's not stagnant. It's, once you got this exhibit here today, but then there comes another fantastic exhibit. I mean, I love history, and this has been a repository for resurrecting history and bringing people together. And I think the love that people of this city have for this facility is astounding.
Yes,
And
it is.
I have never heard anything negative about this facility, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, and that's
But I think when you have people with imagination, vision, and the willingness to take a risk, I think those things make the difference.
I agree. What would you like to see? What should the future be for Cincinnati Museum Center? What would you like to see? What role would you like to see us take as we go into, say, the next 20 years of our existence here?
Well, I think that since we're in the technological age, I think I'd like to see this become a technological center that prepares us for all the rapid technological changes that are taking place. I think there ought to be interaction with the schools and so forth. When we were kids, we went to penny arcades. There's no reason why there can't be these little technological. I went to and here to play games. There's no reason why we couldn't have family technological games that we play. And I'm talking about the usual stuff that you see today. Game stuff. I'm talking about real. Way out technological experiences for the whole family.
One thing I wanted to ask you, and it has to do with one of the many functions and services that Museum Center offers, and that is our Historical Society Library and Archives, because you've made a personal commitment to that organization and its services here at Museum Center by donating or depositing your own papers here. And I know you've been instrumental in encouraging others to do so, in particular African American leaders, the importance of, number one, preserving those records, and two, preserving them here where they can be with all of these other wonderful resources we have. Can you talk about that for a second? I know that's been a commitment of yours too, and that's probably where I've had more involvement with you personally, is in that sort of that archival and preservation end of history.
Well, I always loved history, and I still do. And I understand very clearly that history answers a very important question. Who am I? I think it's important for every group, whether they're immigrants or whether they came in voluntarily or what have you, to know what happened in the past. Because unless you know that, you don't have a sense of being. You don't have a sense of destiny. And you don't have a sense of inspiration. I like to resurrect and hear the voices of all the great men and women of all races, because it makes me richer to know that. It inspires me.
Yeah, I agree. I've spent a good deal of my career collecting and preserving these records from all of these wonderful organizations and individuals in Cincinnati and Hamilton County. And I think it's a great thing to be able to pass those records on to the next group of stewards and so on, so that they're available for research. So as you say, people don't lose that history. They understand where we came from and where we're going as a city and as a community. And I think that's a great part of what Museum Center does too, in addition to exhibits and all the wonderful programs that we have here.
Well, they've had some groundbreaking exhibits. Sisters, I could sit here and list all these exhibits, and you got one right here in America, I Am, which talks about contributions of African Americans in particular, and that's a thing that would inspire young boys and girls in our educational institutions to see what. Well, people who look like me did this, and I think that's very great.
Yeah, I do too. Well, Mr. Mallory, I'd like to thank you for not just for this interview, but just for your decades-long commitment to this organization, and I look forward to working with you in the future with this fine organization too.
Well, we've just begun.
Yeah.
Right?
That's great. Absolutely right.